What's up, true believers? It's Mason here with Comics and Crosses, where we discuss the eternal truths behind our modern mythology. And today is something very special. I got Mike Phillips here. We're talking about his comic projects, in particular the Tesselation, but even more than that. So, Mike, what's up, man? Thanks for joining us.
All right. Thanks for having me.
Totally. Okay, so Mike, first off, I just wanted to hear, could you share a bit about how you got into comics, kind of what, I mean, now you're creating, so can you give us a sense of what that path looked like for you?
It's a long path. Started, in the early 90s with the whole glut. Everything was like chromium covers, and Marvel and DC were finally getting a good run for their money with Image and Valiant, and it was just a great time to have disposable income. Working at flipping burgers and just running out to the comic book store afterwards and blowing it all. That was like the mid 90s. Eventually, though, I went to college and you don't have disposable income anymore. So I kind of fell out of it. But CrossGen then came, and I came back in. And when I finally got my first teaching job, I met a guy online who was running this website called the Continuity Pages. His name's Julian Darius, and he had this wacky ambition that he was going to take every popular character and have a list on the reading order of their life, not reading order 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but reading order from their young age to their old age. So he basically created this list where you could just, start at Superboy and go all the way to Superman, where you would be bouncing around from like Action Comics 538 to Man of Steel 19. He figured out a way to realize, this happened before this chronologically. And this is the kind of stuff where continuity nerds go crazy for this stuff. Oh, yeah. So I saw this and my jaw dropped. I'm like, what is this guy? So I found his email and I contacted him and we got to talk, and I said, I want to help you make this. And we all need somebody like that, who sees your crazy thing and goes, oh, I'm this kind of crazy. I want to help you. And he gave me some projects, and he was just like, all right, we'll find, the inker for, issues 1 through 6 of Sandman. So I'm going and finding all of the creators of Sandman, the early issues. And I was just feeding him data, and he was just punching it all in. And we just got to talking about how can we expand the website. So he started writing articles about current stuff. And Batman Begins came out, I want to say, in 2005. And he wrote a lot of articles on it. And ultimately, he wrote so many words on it. He's like, I'd love to publish this. And that was around the time where Lulu.com and early Create Space on Amazon, you could upload your PDF and publish your own book. So he actually published a 150-page book on Batman Begins before the DVD even came out. And that was kind of like, well, we should do this more often. And people started noticing that we were self-publishing, and we just started publishing other people's works. And that, like Grant Morrison in the early years came out, and then Teenagers from the Future, which is an anthology about the Legion of Superheroes, came out, and we started going to conventions. And, the more you go to conventions, the more contacts you make. And this guy was like, I love Grant Morrison in the early years of the book. I'd love to do one on the Invisibles. And it just kept snowballing. And he's like, oh, by the way, I also want to make movies when I grow up. So it'd be great if we could interview Grant. So just found a way to contact Grant Morrison's wife. And we pitched the idea that we'd love to film an interview. And she was like, that's fine. Let's do it. And we could put it on YouTube or whatever. And eventually, the guy who was writing the Invisible book said, we should try to just make a documentary about Grant. So we kind of went back to Kristen and said, how about we try to do like a 90-minute feature length? And she said, Grant's into it. So next thing you know, we're making a documentary about Grant Morrison, and it just kept snowballing. And short story long, at this point, we've got like 40 books and 7 or 8 documentaries, about Neil Gaiman and Chris Claremont's X-Men and the Image Revolution and Frederick Wortham, and it's just become this thing. It's been about 17 or 18 years now. And Julian, my partner, he was just kind of like, let's start making our own comics, and that's kind of where we are now. So we've been kind of journalists for a while, but now we're kind of trying to dip our toe into the fictional aspect of comics.
That's really cool. It's kind of like being in proximity has eventually birthed kind of your own original ideas and creations. And so maybe you could share a bit. What are some of the comics you created? Because I know you shared with me a little bit of the previous work. So kind of what titles do you have that you put together, and just kind of give us a rundown of what they're about, some of the stuff you created.
The first one I did, because I've always fancied myself an ideas person, but I'd never like had any formal training with writing. So we were making Warren Ellis Captured Ghosts, a documentary about Warren Ellis, and one of the interviewers asked Warren something about the Authority, and he said, I forget how the quote goes, but the basic idea is that are they the good guy? And he's like, well, that's kind of a tricky question. They're the good guy in the sense that if Hitler was fighting Satan, you'd be rooting for Hitler, And that idea kind of blew my mind a little bit. So I was like, I couldn't let go of that idea, So it depends on who the enemy is. That kind of also helps you figure out who the good guy is, kind of deal. So I started thinking, man, what would this kind of hell be like, where a bunch of history's worst people are just down there? What would they be doing right now? And this idea kept bubbling, and I told Julian about it, and he's like, I'll help you write it. I mean, it's a cool idea. So then he was doing like the nuts and bolts, and I was kind of just spewing ideas, and it became something called Necropolitan. And it's kind of like Game of Thrones or Gangs of New York meets Highlander in the sense that, like whenever they have a battle, whoever wins gets the other character's power. So they all have these like halos, which is kind of like obviously a riff on angels. It's kind of disturbing how they get the angels when they show up in hell. But if you beat another person in combat and you scalp them, you put their halo on top of your halo and you gain a little bit of power. So it's, Gangs of New York meets Highlander in hell. And, you've got just this history book full of terrible people that you can just throw into the mix. And now they're all in different gangs. We've got the Romans, which, it's got Caligula and Nero had this crazy idea. Let's start collecting, as these people die, let's start collecting killers. Let's start collecting serial killers. So in their clan, a lot of their muscle are like Jack the Ripper and Elizabeth Bathory. And the story opens up where it's like 2015 or 2016, and Bathory and Jack the Ripper show up in the place where these people are born. And they're here to collect the Craigslist killer, which is somebody we kind of made up, and he's basically kind of like a Dexter in a way, where he thinks he's the good guy, but he's not. But he's been like kind of like a mixture of Dexter and like that show To Catch a Predator. So he's like luring these people via Craigslist into these motels and these situations where he can just knock them off. And it goes wrong at one point, and he dies, and then he shows up in hell. But he's like, but I'm a good guy, man. Why am I in hell? So that's how it starts. And they bring him back to the Roman compound. So you learn about the Roman clan, and eventually later on you learn about Robespierre. He's got a clan downtown.
But Mike, there was a Craigslist killer. Are you saying that you thought of a Craigslist killer like separate from the actual one?
No. Okay, I didn't invent it. I'm actually here to tell you that I am the Craigslist killer. I'm admitting it right now, live. But no, I guess it was like we heard about it. We didn't read much about it, but we like took that idea and mixed it with Dexter. So okay. I don't even know the whole deal about that. So yeah, it's not very original, But
I think that guy was engaged and like super normal on the outside. And it turned out being a psycho. But anyway, I digress. I'm liking everything you're sharing so far.
It's like it just keeps growing in the telling, and like I'm always looking for wackadoos from history to be like, ooh, how could we work them in? We've got a warrior clan out in the hills that's run by Genghis Khan. We've got like a wizards clan up in the mountains near the volcano who's run by Aleister Crowley and Jack Parsons Whiteside and Henry Ford. Of all people. And in the second arc, I'm going to introduce Thomas Edison, and he's another character like this Craigslist killer who doesn't know why he's in hell, and he's trying to figure that out. And we learn his origin, and this is the concept of maybe like how jail creates a criminal. So now he's down here in hell, and he's trying to figure out how to survive, and he's become more and more like feral. But he's like this MacGyver too. So he's had to MacGyver his way through hell just to survive. And he's got all these weird contraptions. So it just keeps getting wackier. It's almost like a Garth Ennis type of comic here that we're making.
It's funny. It kind of makes me think of like with Philadelphia, like how, Rodney Barnes is taking these characters that are historical and adding a whole bunch of, vampire history that, sure, if you look at it that way, there could be this whole other story there. So it's interesting to take little bits. And
I'm gonna have to check that out. I've heard a bit about it, but I didn't really know what the concept was. That sounds really great, actually.
Oh yeah, great series. I wouldn't ruin too much of it for you, but John Adams, the second president of the United States, plays a big role in it, and it's fascinating, to think about the kind of like you're taking the concept of hell and saying, okay, what story would go on in this setting? He's kind of taking in with certain characters, like say they were made a vampire. Now there's a whole big history that can go on from there if they're undying or whatever.
Yeah, I love that kind of stuff. That's right up my alley. I mean, the big buzzword like 10 or 15 years ago was mashup,
Yeah.
So I'm afraid to use that word, but it is kind of in that zone where you take history, you mix in a little bit of like hell and maybe some religion, and you've got this whole new palette of stuff you can do.
Yeah, it was funny to hear your story set in hell, and I really love the ideas and the concept and the whole Gangs of New York kind of flavor to it. Mm-hmm. Because, since I started doing my YouTube channel, I mostly talk about things that are not necessarily Christian content or anything like that. But then people will tell me about stuff like Knights of the Golden Sun or different titles that are come out that have direct like heaven, hell, angels, demons kind of correlations. Mm-hmm. And it's interesting to see just kind of to be able to look at the ideas and where these concepts come from and how people take them different directions. And you gotta love creativity. There's a million.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, like I told you when we were emailing back and forth, I'm not religious in the slightest, but I was raised in a Christian house. So I mean, the myths I was growing up with were do these things right, and you go to this awesome place. You do these other things wrong, and you're going to be, damned for eternity, and that's going to stick with a 9-year-old. You know what I mean? So like, it's kind of just always been in the back of my head. So when I heard Warren Ellis say that thing, there was this whole part of the filing cabinet back here where I'm like, I was always fascinated by the concept of hell and like, does that place really exist? It seems too absurd to exist. But either way, the point is like, I'm not religious in the slightest, but this story would not leave me alone. Once Ellis said what he said, I couldn't stop it. I'm not someone who even focuses too much on horror or even crime genres, but it wouldn't leave me alone. And I figured like, I've got to get this out of my system. And, I'm a school teacher. I mean, if any of my like students' parents even read like half of an issue of this, they'd be like, get my kid out of this guy's class. So there was no upside for me to keep going with this idea, but I couldn't stop it because it felt like an interesting story that I had to tell. So I did it.
Yeah. And it's interesting, because in a lot of the stuff that I kind of explore and stuff on my channel, it's like you're talking about. It's those big ideas, and because I'm bringing my background and kind of Christian perspective to explore some of these ideas about life and death. Even with vampires, you got to realize they're talking about eternal life in a sense. So some of these big concepts that really kind of resonate on a deeper level with human beings are just so fun to talk about, and I think they're so prevalent in comics that it's like, man, we can really like dig in and really get into some really cool ideas and what, just see what we think about them.
Absolutely.
And a lot of times too, I find that, it's not necessarily the Christian belief or paradigm or philosophy that a lot of people that we're talking about, but a lot of times it's what people have taken from those concepts. Like the idea that, if you do good things, you get to heaven. If you do bad things, you're going to be cast to hell, which is not really how it breaks down at the end of the day, but that's a lot of what we take away from it.
Right. That's what I took. I mean, because my mom became a born-again Christian, and it was around the time when my parents, were getting a divorce, or just after they got divorced, and my mom met a guy, and they kind of went down that route together, almost as like a healing thing. They thought this is going to be like a self-help way. They were both kind of like wayward, and they joined together as almost like a team, and this was their new mission for self-betterment.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of my emotions that were mixed in with that, like, this is a new guy in my life. How do I feel? You're not my dad, kind of stuff, And so there was a lot of negativity that was wrapped around born again Christianity. So there was probably a rebellious thing where I was just like, I think this is where I'm getting off the train. And I went a whole different way. And now at this point, I'm atheist or whatever. But I think there is a lot that I took away from being raised in a Christian home, just about morality in general, with good and bad. And that's what I think my new series of Tesselation, it does tackle, like, if you're raised without religion, do your morals, are they just innate? Or do you need a construct taught to you from a young age to give you that morality? Because I find it like, it would be really sad if the only way I was ever going to have morals anyway would be if I were raised in religion. Like, why can't I just learn those things by watching my parents hopefully be good people? So in the first issue, there's a section of the issue that deals with a little bit of like what I call forced morality, because the father is not a great dad. He's just kind of like the assistant coach in the house, you know what I mean? And the mom is, she's like trying to nudge him in the right direction. You got to play more with your son, or we need to like make sure the house is running properly. We got to go to Home Depot and get this stuff. So it's established early on that he's just kind of like in his own world and up his own butt. And then something happens to the mom where he gets to this situation where he now is kind of forced into this role to be the coach, because the coaches have been kicked out of the game, so to speak, by the ref. So now he has to be the coach. And
well, hold up.
Is it in him to change? Is it in him to all of a sudden have morals based on being forced into that now?
Mike, I love the idea you're talking about. Let's back up a second, because we rolled right into the tessellation. So I want you to give just kind of what's your elevator pitch or overview of this concept for this new project called the Tesselation. I think it sounds awesome. Let us know what it is.
It's the concept is that all possible realities exist, and somebody has figured out how to travel between them. Scientifically speaking, nothing magical. They figured out the frequencies involved. So a tech company who has been doing a lot of work with early cell phones in, let's say, the late 90s, they figured out the right frequency, and they were in a good location on the Earth. Let's just put it this way: bombs had dropped there, like atomic bombs have dropped. So they're in a thin place where if you are in this place that has already blown away kind of the fabric between the realities, if you have the right frequency, you can now open the veil and travel to alternate realities where there are infinite other versions of you. So now they're basically manipulating this and selling it as vacations to wealthy people. Kind of like the concept of The Game, the Michael Douglas movie, where if you're rich enough, you can buy an amazing experience that you can't tell if it's real or not. This is not quite like that, but the idea is if you're wealthy enough and you hear through the grapevine from other rich people that there's this company, you can buy an adventure to another reality where you could rob a bank without any kind of repercussions, because then you just come back to your reality where you never robbed a bank. You can cheat on your spouse. You can watch a version of you that's just having a wonderful life or a terrible life. If you want to watch a train wreck and see, what if I did make that decision when I was 17 and I went down that one path? I'd love to see how that turned out. Or what if I'm a complete heroin addict? I want to feel better about how I am in the respect for, when you ever watch that show, what was that show that came out on A&E like a decade ago, like Intervention, where you watch that show, and when you see that show, all of a sudden you're like, wow, my life isn't so bad, because I just watched a half hour of this person completely falling apart. So it would be great to watch another version of myself, crap the bed, so I can feel about my measly life that's not as bad as that. So they're selling this kind of, it's not all they're doing, this company. They have a bigger plan involved, and they're digitally manipulating rich people's dreams to make the big money so they can do their major plan, which I won't reveal right now. So that's one aspect of it, but that's a minor aspect. That's in the background.
Wow.
So really, this first issue plays out where it's a not deadbeat dad, but like a dad who's just not involved. He makes good money, so he feels that's good enough. I mean, as long as I make good money for the family, I don't have to change diapers. I don't have to go out and play catch with my kid. I can just sit on the couch and watch golf. And when my wife comes up and talks to me, she's a nag. But I hope the reader will realize she's not the nag. She's the matriarch, and he's just this jerk. And he makes a terrible decision on the highway. And that's where things get weird. That's where my gimmick comes in. So as he sees a guy who's about to pass him on the right, he decides in that moment whether he's going to race this guy. And we've all been there, where like you're in the fast lane and someone's just right up on your butt. And they decide they're going to pass you on the right. And I think a lot of people in that moment make the decision, no, you're not. You're not passing me on the right. And you put your foot on the gas, not a lot, but just to show the person that what they're doing is a little jerky. So that's when the issue splits into different realities. So you're going to be reading rows of different realities for the rest of the issue. So the top row basically turns into one decision where he eases off the gas. He's like, I'm not messing with this guy. And in the second row, he kind of gives the guy a little run for his money. And in the third row, he just floors it. And the bottom row is that Michael Douglas row, where a version of him that broke off a long time ago, who's this rich LA lawyer, is buying adventures. And so the bottom row, you can just read throughout where he's robbing a bank or he's, doing all this other stuff. So the top three rows, you just see almost like a choose your own adventure, where he made this one, like, just the amount of pressure on the gas pedal leads to these three possible realities. And that's how the rest of the issue plays out. So the beginning of it starts as a normal comic, and then it just splinters into this weird, crazy, I'm sure people will call it a gimmick, where you just choose your own adventure, and you just see how they all play out.
Yeah, but that's something really interesting to explore, and that's really cool. I like that concept, kind of almost like a butterfly effect sort of thing, and even what you were describing earlier kind of reminds me of Westworld and sort of this concept of being able to have access to, a different reality. But in this case, very personalized one, very much your world,
There's a lot of role play for sure. And you don't even have to go to these other realities and see yourself. You can just go have an adventure that you wouldn't be able to get away with in your own reality. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like robbing a bank.
And do you feel like and what are your plans for this series of Tesselation? Is this meant to be a mini series, an ongoing? What are you looking to do with it?
I'm looking to keep it going as long as I can. I'd love to. Obviously, I'm making issue 1 now, and all the artists are pretty much paid, and we're going to do a Kickstarter in February, and that's why I reached out. But issue 2, I'm literally scripting now. I meticulously plotted it. Probably took too long with the plot, but now I'm about at page 5 or 6. But I've already got plans for 3 through 10. And the artist I found, thank goodness, this is just the weird luck of the draw. I had tried a couple different artists, and they were just almost mercenary. They were like, okay, you give me the money and I'll draw this thing. And things fizzled or whatever. But this third guy I found, he read it and he was in. He was like, I get it. I love it. He's already kind of basically, I already feel like he's one of my best buddies. Like, he just completely bought in, and he loves my baby as much as I do. So I feel like he and I, as long as we stay healthy and we can keep doing this, we'll just keep making it until it's not financially viable. Awesome.
That sounds really cool. What's the artist's name on this project?
His name is Hernan Gonzalez. He's from Argentina. He's really fantastic. He's told me one of his favorite artists is Sean Phillips. And crazily enough, as I've been kind of posting art recently, someone just came up and on Facebook and said, "This is great. This reminds me of Sean Phillips." And I immediately tagged Hernan in that. And so he was going gaga over that. So he's got that kind of style.
Beautiful. Okay. And so the Kickstarter is going to kick off in February.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so we'll definitely include the link to that and, for the way that everybody can get involved. And so once, let's see, so this is going to be at least 10 issues, probably ongoing further. Do you have other like projects in your mind already that you want to get to, or are you fully just locked into this right now?
There's something about this idea that, like, I don't know. I've always wanted categories. I'm kind of OCD like that. I need boundaries. And if you ever read this issue, you'll see kind of an OCD mind has created this comic.
Yeah.
I need there to be kind of like boundaries. So I feel like once I created the Tesselation, I almost felt like, oh, this is the sandbox I can just hang out in forever. So every idea that gushes out at this point, it's almost like, oh, where do I fit that into the Tesselation?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, the Necropolitan is this crazy horror, crazy kooky crime comic that wouldn't really fit with the Tesselation. So now I feel like I've got two kind of sandboxes, and I think I'll be good with that. I mean, a third idea has been bubbling up about simulations and like what was that game called? No Man's Sky? Is that what it's called? There's a game where like this guy created. I mean, it came out like maybe like 5 or 6 years ago, where the way he wrote the algorithm, like it kind of self-perpetuates, and like you'll never be able to go to every world in the game. It's like a space adventure game where you can just go to this planet and explore. And like the idea that like there are creatures walking around on some of these planets that just think they're actually grazing through the field. Like they think they're this animal. And the idea of simulations where are we in a simulation, that kind of idea. So I don't know if I'll try to shoehorn that into the Tesselation or if I'll try to come up with some sort of how many levels of the simulation are there. Because if we live in a simulation and we're creating games that are like The Sims, that's a level below a level below a level. And I love the idea that, how many copies of a copy, how far down, that Russian Doll can you go? Speaking of Russian Doll, that's a really cool show on Netflix. And I think that's kind of where my head's at. Because if that turns out the way I think it will in season 2, I feel like she is in a video game. So I love the idea of that, where someone's playing you. Someone's put your skin on and is like living in that reality. I don't know. Sorry.
Totally.
I digress.
Yeah. Are we in the Matrix? Or are we somewhere else?
Right, but not as crazy as the Matrix, where like the outside world is like this hellscape or anything like that. Maybe some dude who's got a donut and a coffee, and his job is to just make sure like the next patch of The Sims goes through and that kind of stuff, and he spills some coffee on the keyboard and it messes up everything down one level. That not as like
Horton Hears a Who, and we're like in Whoville.
Yes, yeah, a little bit more realistic.
Yeah, very cool. And let's see, what was I going to ask? Oh, that's right. So that made me think. What's your favorite comic series or some of your favorite inspirations from comics? Some of the best stories that you like.
Sandman was a great one back in the day, and Swamp Thing with Alan Moore and Steve Bissette was good. Concrete, for some reason, when anybody ever asks me this, I go to Concrete, and because that was the first one that felt Seinfeldy to me. It was like about nothing. You know what I mean? It was like the first one that wasn't like, obviously it's science fiction, but it just seemed like everyday life. Obviously the guy's got a rock suit on, or his mind has been put into a rock suit, but it just felt like this is just everyday life, just dealing with life and the foibles of life. And that was like one of the first times where I'm like, okay, comics can be this. And then you see Harvey Pekar and you get into more like autobiographical stuff. But that one to me was a big game changer. It was like, oh, this can be comics too. It's not colorful. It's completely black and white. It's like the opposite of everything I was ever raised on with your chromium covers. And it was like, oh, okay. It's another genre, because I think going back to Warren Ellis again, in the movie we made, he was kind of like saying something about, no, I don't want to just be writing about superheroes punching and kicking each other all the time. That would be like going to the library and every book is about nurses. I mean, I need different genres. I need there to be, and that was that moment for me with concrete. I would love it if Paul Chadwick would, get back into that and make some more stuff.
Awesome. Yeah, I love it. Okay, Mike. Well, so tell us, what is the best way to follow you, to get in touch with you, to stay on the latest of the things you're creating, so people can check you out and be up to date with the project?
Okay. On Twitter, I'm at Mike Makes Comics, spelled how it sounds. With Sequart, which is like our comics journalism website, you can just go to sequart.org. That is SEQUART.org, and you can find out about all the nonfiction books we've made about comics history and the documentaries. In fact, some of our documentaries are on YouTube and Amazon Prime for free right now. Like, for instance, you can see Grant Morrison Talking with Gods on YouTube right now. The Warren Ellis documentary is on YouTube as well. And on Amazon Prime, I believe we have the Chris Claremont movie. And I want to say, The Image Revolution. So you can check that stuff out too. But for me personally, it's at Mike Makes Comics on Twitter.
Awesome.
Thanks for having me, man. It's good I walk around here and it's just normal dad stuff. So the fact that anybody even lets me talk about this, I'm sure if anybody watches what you're doing right now, they're like, man, this guy is verbal diarrhea. Pent up in here, man.
No, I mean, that's how it is. And especially, I think for, minds like ours that are into comics, that can get wrapped up in so much world creation and creativity. It's just like, I remember a day where I hung out with a buddy, who was into comics in college, and we literally must have spent 8 hours just blabbing about comics and realized, like, wow, we've really talked this whole time just about like all these random things and but and especially when you're creating, it's like, man, you need to be able to get that out and share, because if you weren't passionate about it, you wouldn't be doing it, right?
Absolutely. And I used to work with somebody who was talking about like the rule of attraction or the law of attraction. Like, if you think about something enough, you're eventually going to get to your goal, because every stimulus that comes at you, you put it in the blender inside of what your goal is, and your brain kind of finds ways to manipulate it or just toss it aside if it's unnecessary. So yeah, I'm constantly thinking about the Tesselation and Necropolitan and like how to get the word out or how to put this story together. So yeah, I'm just constantly in that zone, which just means when my wife says we have to fix the ceiling fan, I'm like, what? No. Yeah. I don't know how to use tools. I want to create. I can't fix things around the house. Kidding me? Yeah. I'm basically the main character of the guy from the Tesselation. I'm not great. She's the coach and I'm the assistant coach.
Yeah. Yeah, the good Lord chose not to bless me with any kind of handyman skills, so I am I just do what I can, and I painted a wall in my office, and I felt like 10 feet tall. And
YouTube's great. I put together a whole grill. My dad used to be the YouTube. He would come and help me, but now I don't. I can just use YouTube.
Yeah, it's amazing how much you can do with a little video help. Cool, Mike. Well, I appreciate it, man. This has been a lot of fun, and I really mean it. I love the concept. I love the ideas you're coming up with. And I hope that everybody can jump in, follow, support, be on the Kickstarter, and see this thing take off and happen, and see just more cool stuff come out of Mike and the whole creative crew, Hernan, and everybody involved with the project.
Thanks for having me, Mason. This has been really fun.
Yeah, you got it, brother. Talk to you next time.
Okay, bye.